All right, my name is Brian Leathem. I work at Red Hat on the Red Hat mobile application platform. Today, we're going to talk about large-scale JavaScript applications. Specifically, we're going to look at the WFM, a workforce management application that I wrote for the Red Hat mobile application platform. That'll be our case study. We'll sort of get into that at the end. We'll do a little bit of live coding with that. Before we begin, though, just to get a feel for who's in the audience, can I see by show of hands who's a JavaScript developer? All right, and how about Java developers? And anything else? Yeah, all right, good stuff. So as I was saying, last year I took on the task of re-implementing the field workforce management solution that's pretty popular in our Red Hat mobile application platform. We wanted to re-implement it as a set of reusable components, so to be able to provide developers with a set of modules they could use to build out a similar solution. So by using modules, we would allow developers to be able to pick and choose the functionality that they wanted to bring into their application to solve their specific problem. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to look at modules in general, sort of zeroing in on code reuse and keeping our code dry in JavaScript. And then we'll look at how we solve the problem with the WFM solution. So the concept of modularity is not new. We can see modules in many places all throughout the world, right? If we think of a module in general as something that's reusable, something that's interchangeable. My favorite example of a module is the International Space Station, right? So it's up there floating up in space. Built over the past 20 years as a collection and an assembly of modules built in different countries throughout the world. And so here's a bit more detailed diagram identifying some of the modules we have up there. Over the years, some of the modules have been replaced, right, and enhanced, made better. We couldn't imagine shipping up a new module if we didn't have a standard interface between modules defining how they connect, how they interact. If we weren't able to replace a module to be able to provide new functionality, solve use cases we hadn't thought of before. Another example, more mundane example of modules I like is nuts and bolts, right? Sort of more speaking to a shared standard. We didn't always have a common thread pattern, a common thread sizes with bolts. A particular company making a certain machine, they would cut their own threads to their own size. If you broke a bolt, you just couldn't go down to the hardware store and buy one. So now we have two standards for nuts and bolts, but I'll take two standards over one. And my final example of modularity is with Lego, right? A bit of a lighter tone. But given a simple set of bricks and a child's imagination, we can create almost anything. So when the creators of Lego shipped the first set of Lego blocks, they empowered children and adults to create their own toys and implement solutions for their unperceived use cases. So for me, from an open source developer, providing a set of modules to a community, Lego is kind of the ideal story, right? If we can provide developers with a set of components that they can use to solve problems and build applications to solve their use cases, then we've found success. So there's a number of patterns for reusing software, right? From the low down, close to the code level, all the way up to the large scale cross-organizational concepts. Java offers patterns for code reuse at many different levels. We can encapsulate our logic in Java classes, right? We can use those classes throughout our applications. We can take those classes, package them in jars, and reuse those jars throughout our applications. With Java EE, we can similarly create wars and ears and reuse code in that way. OSGI introduced another concept of modularity with the idea of contracts and dynamic loading of code. The next major release of Java, with Java 9, we're going to see Project Jigsaw is going to implement another Java module system, so giving us more control in sharing and reusing our code. Over the years, various systems have been introduced to address code reuse between systems and break down our monoliths into smaller, loosely coupled, and easier to maintain systems. So from the old days of Corba and SOA, we now see a microservices approach, often touted as the silver bullet for code reuse in enterprises. If you guys were at the keynote demo, you would have seen Red Hat's vision around microservices and how we see that playing out in the near future. However, code reuse at this scale is not the topic for today's session. So it's important to pick the right platform architecture, but this talk is aimed at the next layer down, right? So we are implementing our solution. We want to implement some services or applications in the solution, and we want to make sure we write the best code that solves the problem. So we want to structure our applications to maximize code reusability within the application and between successive implementations of the application, right? So quite often we don't solve a problem just once, we want to do it multiple times. So if we want to keep our code dry, right, where we don't repeat ourselves, we can do that by leveraging third-party code and structuring our own code to be reusable. And we'll be in good shape to have maintainable software we can leverage over the long term. So when used appropriately, dry can help us in many ways. Right? We'll have fewer implementations in our code of often used patterns, fewer implementations, fewer bugs, fewer lines of code to maintain. It's easier to onboard new members. They'll be able to understand the structure, the layout of our applications, and we'll future-proof our software. On the other hand, sometimes it's just better to copy and paste, right? We don't want to introduce unnecessary complexity simply to for some simple implementations. I don't know if any of you guys have ever seen any complicated class hierarchies that have been done solely in the name of not repeating yourselves. So with that goal in mind, let's take a look at what constructs are available for us to structure our JavaScript applications with and see what's similar to the Java ecosystem. So we can break JavaScript today down into two domains. We have the back end, Node.js, and we have the front end, right, the web browser on the desktop or the mobile device, Cordova applications or the mobile web on our mobile devices. So we'll survey some options in each of these spaces, and then we'll dive into some choices and compromise we made in our WFM solution. So perhaps the most obvious way, I'm moving around too much. Perhaps the most obvious way we can keep our code dry is to make appropriate use of helper libraries. Right? Tools like Lodash and Underscore can remove a lot of fragile boilerplate code from our applications. The best part about using libraries like these is you don't have to maintain the code yourself. Right? We have eyes all over the world looking at the code, finding bugs, fixing issues. We can also save ourselves a lot of pain when it comes to building our applications. Grunt and Gulp are both popular choices nowadays, but we can also go a long way with smaller single-purpose tools invoked via NPM run scripts. NodeMon, Browserify, Watchify, Browser Sync, Auto Prefixer. There's a whole host of tools available to help reduce the custom code we have to write when trying to build out, when we're writing the build scripts for our applications. Testing it is another area where we end up creating a lot of boilerplate code, especially when we're trying to successfully test those hard-to-reach corner cases. So making good use of tools like Mocha and Chai and many others can help us keep our tests more maintainable. In the front end, now, specifically, we can be introduced in a number of different ways: HTML, JavaScript, CSS, depending on the degree of encapsulation of code reuse that we want to achieve. So let's carry on with our discussion of libraries, but looking at those that affect the front end directly. So the number of libraries we can use to build out our front end. jQuery has been the gorilla in the room for a long time, right? So it not only provides a DOM API abstracting over, a cross-browser abstraction over the DOM API, but it provides a plugin mechanism, allowing us to encapsulate front-end functionality, and it has spawned a whole ecosystem of jQuery plugins. Other libraries in the front-end space include templating libraries, MVC constructs, and future-proofing polyfills. So a well-vetted approach to building web apps these days is to identify which of these libraries you need to solve your problems and assemble them together and build your solution. It's a perfectly acceptable way to build a robust environment and create dry, maintainable code. But then rather than follow a roll-your-own approach when selecting a web framework, a lot of people prefer a more prescriptive approach. So for example, Angular and Ember, or even Polymer, provide a prescribed approach for developing applications. The trade-off of flexibility for simplicity is not always an easy one to make. Finally, in the front-end JavaScript space, right, if we're looking at mobile apps, we want to consider Cordova plugins. They're another great means to encapsulate our code and reuse them between applications. But we're confined to the mobile environment with our Cordova plugin. So if you're looking to deliver desktop applications, they might not be a good fit. Now, while not JavaScript, we couldn't discuss code reuse in the front end without considering CSS libraries. So projects like Bootstrap, Foundation, and Patternfly, they follow patterns like BEM, OO CSS, object-oriented CSS, and SMUX, one of the original CSS frameworks, and let us reuse our existing contracts. But it also teaches us how we can craft our own HTML and CSS to be reusable. Let's look a bit at BEM, the block element modifier. Right? B stands for block. A block is a standalone entity that's meaningful on its own. So think of examples like headers, containers, menus, inputs. An element is a part of a block, has no standalone meaning, so no meaning on its own, but is semantically tied to a block, like a menu item, checkbox, a header title. Finally, the modifier is a flag on a block, and you can use them to adjust the appearance or behavior of the block. For example, disabled, highlighted, checked, color yellow, that kind of thing. So the BEM specification, for lack of a better word, it tells us how we can structure our HTML, choose appropriate naming conventions, so we can take blocks, drop them in different places in our application, reuse the HTML used to create the markup, and the CSS used in styling those. If you've ever used Bootstrap, you've used BEM. So code reuse on the back end mirrors the pattern on the front end. We want to leverage existing libraries and frameworks whenever we can. So when creating REST endpoints in our back end, we want to use an abstraction over the Node.js API. So projects like Express, Restify, or Happy provide a number of APIs that help us define and implement and secure our endpoints. Now, when we want to package our modules and deliver them to our clients, our browser and mobile clients, we have a few options there as well. So AMD provides support for packaging and delivering your modules asynchronously. So your app will download the modules as the resources are required. If you need to support offline mode in a mobile app, this might not, you might want to evaluate if this capability meets your use case. The common JS module format, on the other hand, is used in Node, and it can be used in the browser with the Browserify tool. And then we have ES6 modules coming in our next version of JavaScript. Work well in browsers, still a bit of an unknown how that's going to play out in the Node.js environment. Lastly, we want to talk about a repository for our modules. So we have a few options there as well. I'll just summarize it in my opinion. Bower is dead, NPM is king, and JSPM is looking kind of cool. We want to see what's coming there. So in WFM, it's obviously out of scope to target all these approaches for code reuse when building WFM applications with the modules we want to build out. So we had to make some choices in what we could both use and target with our WFM modules. Some considerations we took into account right at the beginning was in determining the nature of the applications. So at the time the application started up, was the feature set static, or did it have to be dynamic, right? So if we're familiar with Eclipse, we can think of loading Eclipse plugins at runtime. We're introducing new functionality, changing the functionality as it runs. On the other hand, if we have a static feature set, we can simplify things quite a bit by not supporting dynamically loading modules. How will the modules be wired together? How will they communicate, right? We want to make sure our modules are loosely coupled so that we can achieve the goal of letting users or developers build an application and then pick and choose which modules they need to provide certain functionality. We don't want the lack of a module being present to cripple the application or break other modules. So the final consideration we had in making our choices for WFM is we wanted to be able to build out a solution with today's technologies. We wanted to be able to deliver something that developers could build on today. So some bleeding edge solutions like Angular 2 and Polymer were immediately off the table. And we wanted to be able to give developers a prescriptive approach, right? We wanted to be able to tell them how they should build their application and minimize the amount of choices that they had to make when building out WFM implementations. So given the above design goals, we decided to build on top of Angular 1.4 on the client and Express on the back end. WFM is deployed to the Red Hat mobile application platform. Express is well supported in that environment. A lot of expertise within the team there, so Express makes a good fit. We chose, for the CSS layer of the project, we chose the Angular Material project. It provides good support for both mobile and desktop clients. Finally, no finally here. So modules will be distributed via NPM. We'll be using Browserify on the client, Simple Require on the server in our cloud apps. And in terms of modules, Angular 1 provides its own module system, right? We have Angular modules. We just had to find a way to make that work well within our NPM package delivery mechanism. But we'll see shortly how we can make that work with Browserify. So Express, our choice in Express, it works well because Express has a distributed routing mechanism. So you can create a new router, you can include that in your application, and it will serve requests to that mounted endpoint. So in this way, we can create a module that not only creates the traffic on the front end in response to user input, but is also listening and responding on the back end. So when we'll take a tour of the code, we'll see some examples of that in practice. NPM has the advantage of being well established and has an ever-increasing number of packages available. It works well in the browser using Browserify, and of course is well supported in Node using Require. So we can use the same mechanism to distribute modules in both the client and the server side of our applications. So the trick to providing Angular modules via NPM is to set the CommonJS modules export to the string name of the module. So in our module, where we saw, if you're familiar with creating CommonJS formatted modules, you have to specify the module exports. That's what gets exported from the module. So if we set that to the string, then in our application, all we have to do is require the name of the, I forgot the surrounding code there. That goes in the Angular module definition, right? So we're going to go and load the require statement, put that in the Angular module definition, and it will pick up the name of the Angular module. So now we have NPM nicely encompassing the same boundaries of a module as the Angular module mechanism is. When we get to our live coding session, we'll be creating a new module and see how that plays out in practice. Now, to keep our modules loosely coupled, we introduced the Mediator Pattern. So Adi Osmani has a great blog I encourage you to read, linked here at the bottom, discussing this pattern. He introduces the pattern with a simple analogy where we can think of the Mediator Pattern as your typical air traffic control tower, right? So I'm just going to, let me just quote Adi here, he says it well. So the air traffic control tower handles what planes can take off because all communications are done through the control tower and not from plane to plane. So a centralized control tower then is key to the success of the system and is what the mediator really is. So on the server side, we see an example of the server-side implementation of a WFM module where it's going to listen to mediator events. So here it's going to subscribe to the WFM work order create event. It's going to perform the create action, and it's going to publish the result. So when we structure our application like this, we can add a WFM module to our application, include it on our server side. Then any module that needs to create an event, to create an object on the client, will hit the endpoint, fire the appropriate mediator topic, and then we just have to listen to that mediator topic to tie in with whatever database we want. So it's a nice way of loosely coupling the application to the back-end implementation of the module. So putting all these pieces together, we can get an idea of what the application architecture will look like. So in this diagram, you can see both both client and server applications are structured as a series of loosely coupled modules. So at the top, the green bubbles, we see application modules that we're going to structure our application using the same kind of pattern as we do in the WFM modules. The WFM modules are going to have, some of them will have only a client-side implementation. They're just going to affect how the user interacts with the application. Some of them will have a server-side implementation, and some of them will have both. But the neat thing about this pattern is the module, if you plug the module into the client, you plug the module into the server, it's going to be totally responsible for the traffic over the wire, firing off the request to the REST endpoint using the sync API that you get on the RHMAP platform, and it's going to couple to our application using the mediator pattern. So when we need to create or do any kind of CRUD operation on an object, it'll fire the corresponding event. Then our application can listen for that event, go retrieve the data from a back end using an MBAS service, go to the database directly, return that application to the server side end of the module, which will return it to the client. So by dropping these modules into our applications, we're going to connect the front end and back end without having to take any of this over-the-wire communication into account ourselves. So at this point, I'm going to introduce FeedHenry Raincatcher. So FeedHenry Raincatcher is it's an open source implementation of our WFM modules. So you can go to github.com/feedhenry-raincatcher. You will see our demo applications there and all the modules that we're providing as open source. So at this point, we'll see if I can do it. I'll start talking about Raincatcher instead of WFM. So we have a number of Raincatcher modules available today. Go to GitHub, check them out. They cover all sorts of aspects. We got a module that simply captures a signature on a device and provides that to you as an image format. We have modules that encapsulate the FeedHenry FH-Sync API to give you offline access and data synchronization between your application and your back end. And a whole host of others. Okay, so demo time. I'm going to switch to a demo. We're going to do a quick walkthrough of WFM so you guys can see what it's about. We're going to take a look at the code and see how the code is structured, see how this loose coupling using the mediator pattern plays out. And then we're going to put our skills to the test and see if we can do some live coding and introduce a new WFM module. Okay, so let me switch to mirror. Okay, so here we see I'm running a bunch of Node instances. We have in the top left, we have our cloud app running. In the bottom left, we have a portal, WFM portal application running. Bottom right, we have a mobile application running. So we'll see what these look like in the browser. Just to introduce the concept of WFM. The WFM stands for Field Workforce Management, right? So we provide a pair of applications. We provide a portal application that your back office would use to coordinate like a fleet of workers. Imagine you're a plumbing company, you have someone taking calls in the office, they need to dispatch a plumber to go off and do a job. So the plumber will have then a mobile app that they'll fire up, will tie into the system, and they will see work orders dispatched from the back office. So this here is the mobile application running in the browser using Chrome's module, mobile emulation. Here we see the portal application. Here we see a similar set of work orders. So we're already seeing some code reuse in play now between the work order, in the work order list between the portal and the mobile app. On the mobile application, we see a CRUDL type list, a list detail pattern of our work orders. So we have the list of work orders. We can click on a work order to see the detail page. If we're using the same code, the same module to provide the list of work orders here through our Raincatcher work order module, we see the same list, the same detail page. So kind of neat, we're able to reuse the same code between the mobile client and the portal the web client. And this was achievable thanks to the cool Angular Material project, which is an Angular implementation of Google's material design, if you're familiar with that at all. We have similar screens for work orders, groups, maps. All these data APIs, so all these data lists, all these data models are each represented as individual modules. So we have a Raincatcher work order module, a Raincatcher worker group module, and all these are going to consume the Raincatcher sync module to give us data synchronization between the back end and the various clients. So if we go through creating a new work order, create a work order, have to fill out the details. Once this is all filled out, it's kind of neat because it's going to publish a mediator topic, publish an event on a mediator topic. Oh, it's got to be 2017. So when I click create, the module running in the browser is going to fire a topic fire an event on a mediator topic that the work order module is going to listen to. It's going to listen to that. It's going to issue a REST request to the back end that is populated by the server component of the work order module. Then that work order module is going to fire an event on the mediator topic that we can listen to in our cloud application. So I think we see that here. We can see the topics that we're listening to in our cloud application. Oh, I'm not showing the individual firing of the message. We'll see it when we take a look at the code. Another example of a reusable module, here we have a FeedHenry map module, which allows us to just drop in the FeedHenry map API, the Google Map API, give it a list of work orders, and it'll visualize those for us using the Google Maps interface. Each of these locator markers is located on the map, corresponding to a work order. Again, if we build out an application, we don't have the map module present, nothing's going to break. Anything else we want to show here? Yeah, the last thing we want to show is the workflow. That's where we're going to do our live coding. So the idea with the mobile application is we want to take an item like a work order and push it through a workflow. A workflow has a number of steps, and each step can either be dynamic. So in this case, we see these app forms It's a whole another part of the Red Hat mobile application platform. AppForms lets anyone use a GUI tool to create mobile applications. We offer integration of that through WFM. That's not what this talk is about. What we're going to do, or we have another idea, another concept of a workflow using static forms. So here we see a list of Angular directives we want to render as we push a work order through a workflow. So what we're going to do in our live coding session, we're going to create a new work order and drop it into a workflow and see how that renders on the device, and uses the Mediator topics to communicate with the system. So that's the portal app. Real quick, looking at the mobile app, we can select a work order. We can begin the workflow. It's going to, here we see use of the WFM signature module to capture signature. A geolocation module that will use, the geolocation module is actually kind of cool because in the browser we'll use the HTML5 geolocation APIs. When you're on a mobile device, our module will automatically use a Cordova plugin to get the APIs using native APIs. Risk assessment grabs another. All right, so we're pushing this work order through the workflow. We pushed it through a couple steps. Now we come to the final page and we see the results. So we want to now go and create, in our live coding demo, we're going to go and create a new work order, a new workflow step, and see how that fits in there. Before we do that, a quick look at our Raincatcher code base. So we have a lot of repos to manage in a WFM solution and a module solution, right? So this is part of the price we pay for keeping our code dry. Yeah, thanks. I can make this bigger. I think I can make, I can't make this side bigger. Basically, on the left-hand side, the small font, it's just a list of our repositories. If you go to the GitHub URL I gave you, you'll see the list of all the repositories there. You can check them out. Got lots of readmes you can look through, see what the functionality is. So what we're looking at here is an Angular application for our portal application. So we can see in here the structure of consuming Angular modules distributed via NPM using Browserify. So if you're familiar with Angular, is everyone familiar with Angular? Anyone? Yes, familiar with Angular? So here we define our Angular module, and then as we list our Angular dependencies, we can just go and drop right in our Browserify require statements, right? And if you remember, I showed a code snippet earlier where the module.exports of an NPM module would return a string corresponding to the Angular module name. So we have this nice concise list then of our dependencies that we don't have to repeat ourselves. We don't have to put the require somewhere else and then put a corresponding string in. Everything builds out nicely. So we're going to include Angular UI, Angular material. This pattern is adopted by a lot of Angular projects of exporting the Angular string name in the module exports, right? So we adopt a similar pattern, and we're able to include our FeedHenry Raincatcher modules in our application. And then, because it's such a nice pattern, we can structure our own application, our own implementation. We can structure it similarly. So we'll create a bunch of NPM modules within our application and export the string name in a similar way. So if we look at the workflow, oh no, let's first look at the server side. So here on the server side, you're not going to be able to see this, are you? So on the left-hand side, this is the repository for our cloud application. Structured pretty standard. We have an app folder with a list of a bunch of implementations. of the various data types we want to include in our application. So we'll have a work order, workflow, result, message, group, right? So these are all going to correspond to modules that we've imported. And this is where we're going to integrate with this is where we're going to be able to provide data and respond to the CRUDL operations that the WFM modules want us to perform for them. So in this demo application, I simply created this simple array store as like a dummy database, and it's going to respond to all the mediator requests for CRUDL operations, update them, put them into an array. But this is the point in our code where we could listen to these events, and we can go and contact our MBAS service. We could contact our database, our legacy system, whatever it is that we want to contact, and loosely couple our data access from our application implementation. So the last thing I want to look at before we get to writing some code is the workflow engine. It's kind of a neat implementation of the Mediator pattern. There's a lot of code which we can skip over. The piece I want to show you is this, the step subscription. So we're in our Angular controller. We want to subscribe to this event, WFM workflow step done. So what we're going to do is we're going to push a work order through the workflow, let the workflow step do its own rendering. It's going to render a form to collect its data, as many pages as it needs to collect all the data that it needs. Once a work order step has collected its data, it's going to fire an event on the mediator topic. In this case, the topic named WFM workflow step done is going to fire an event on that topic that we can listen to, and then we can collect the data provided from that workflow step and build it out in the result set associated with our work order. So in this way, we can create a series of modules then that will implement our workflow steps. They will be responsible for collecting their own data, and we'll hand it off to the application when the data collection is done. So that's the mechanism that we're going to want to tie into when we create our own workflow step. Okay. Can I really not make this bigger? Okay, so I've gone and stubbed out a new module called Raincatcher Debnation. It's got a pretty simple structure. It's got a lib folder where we're going to put our code. Inside that lib folder, I've created an Angular folder. And in that, a template folder where I'm going to put our templates that we want to use and, to implement our workflow step. So every workflow step is going to require two stages. It's going to require a form page where we want to collect the data, and it's going to require another page where we display the data. So the form page is pretty straightforward. We're just going to use a label and an input, and we'll be able to implement or collect a string value from our application and report that back to the workflow engine. And our display page, this stuff should all be commented out for now. In our display page, we're just going to display the value that we collected with that input. And then we're going to need to create the Angular directive associated with these. One trick we had to do to get the templates to load was we had to convert the HTML to JavaScript, to a JavaScript file and load them so we could access them via the template cache. It was the easiest way to get the HTML string associated with the template loaded into the application. Otherwise, it was buried deep in a Node modules folder. So we have a little utility to help us with that called WFM template build. So I will run NPM. Can you guys see that? Is that too small? Okay, so I'll just do npm run watch That'll invoke our template build. Anytime we make a change to the HTML file, it'll regenerate the JavaScript for us. Now, I should mention that as a developer, one thing I found really important about a module system is it not impair our ability to craft an application, right? So we've gotten used to developing JavaScript applications, to having that rapid turnaround, that rapid feedback. We change an HTML file, we change a JavaScript file, we want to see that effect in the browser right away. The shorter we make that feedback cycle, the more we turn into craftsmen and crafting an application rather than sort of following a process and, the old days of deploying a war, waiting for the container to reload the war, see the new HTML, and that multi-minute turnaround time sort of kills that experience. So I wanted to make sure that when we develop these WFM modules, that we'd still be able to keep that rapid turnaround. And so a neat tool that we can use to do that, to achieve that, is NPM Link. So if you have a project and you've NPM installed a module for that project, you can have the source code for that module in an adjacent folder, and you can use NPM Link to point the dependency of your current project to that other folder. So you can make live changes in that source repo for the module and see the changes right away in your application. We can tie that in through live reload, so all we have to do is in our editor, make a change, hit save, the browser refresh, and we'll see the change right away. It's even neater with CSS. If you make a CSS change, the page doesn't even have to reload. Live reload is able to reapply the CSS change live for you. So we'll see how that plays out in our module here. Okay, so what have we done? We're going to go ahead and create directives. The example we're going to create, I decided, is going to be a collision reporting tool. So you have a car crash, and you got to go there, and you got to collect the information required to be able to process, analyze, figure out the insurance claims, and so on. So we're going to have two pages we have to create. We'll have the collision form, where we're going to collect the data, and we're going to have the collision directive that we're going to use to display the data that we collect. So you'll see here we have the module exports line is going to be DevNation collision, and this corresponds to the DevNation collision name of our Angular module. So when I go into my application, my Raincatcher application, I will here in the portal app, I will npm install. I can install using a relative path to be able to develop the application and to be able to develop the module. And then once I publish to npm, I would npm install with the name and use npm link to be able to still access the module locally. So if I npm install Raincatcher DevNation, we'll go ahead and install that dependency into my portal application. And I will similarly do an npm install Raincatcher DevNation in my portal application. Restart those running locally. Now I need to make a change to my mobile application. I need to go to where we're loading all the modules, and as the applications come up, it grabs focus, keeps stealing it away from me. So here I'm going to add the required DevNation collision. So this is going to load our module into the mobile application. And I similarly want to do a similar require in the portal application. So now that code is there. It's present as an Angular module ready for me to consume. And those are the only lines of code I'm going to change in my mobile and portal application. Because now I can jump over to my portal application we saw earlier. I can look at the list of workflows. I can take a particular workflow. Let's go ahead and create a new workflow. And we're going to call this collision report. we're going to create the workflow. And now I need to specify the two. So here I can embed some custom HTML. I can go ahead and put inputs and stuff in here. But what I want to do is I want to put in those Angular directives we just created in our Debnation collision module. And those directives are available for us to use because we put the require statement in and when we defined our list of Angular modules. So if I go ahead and I got to give this a code name, collision, we'll call it collision report. We want to give it a form template, C-O-L-L-I-S-N, and hold on one sec. The format here has escaped my mind. Let me double check what I'm doing. Right, so for the form, yeah, we just need the form name there, so we're going to put collision, collision, what is it? Collision form. Collision-form, so that's the name of the Angular directive we created in our, I misspelt collision while I was working this out, and it took like, I don't know, a long time to find that. And now, so that was the form template, so that's the template we want to render when we want to collect the information. So now we're going to look at the view template. So this is the directive we want to run when we're displaying the data. And so that's going to take a value attribute, and we're going to set it to result.submission. So this is the value that's going to be returned to the provided to us when we iterate over the steps of a workflow. I spelt all that right. Okay. So now we got this new collision report. So we can go over to our list of work orders. We can take a particular work order. We can edit it and assign it to that workflow, collision report, update the work order. Now, and come over to our mobile application, do a refresh. We select the workflow we edited, we begin the workflow, and here we say the name element that we wanted to collect, so Brian. Okay, so that's cool. Let's go and see if we can add some more functionality to this. We need a lot more than just the name when we're working out, when we're filing a collision report. Let's go and add another input for the to collect the address. So now if we come over here, you see that? I refreshed already by the time I got there. Can you guys see that? The font we chose for this isn't coming out very well on the display. The inputs are the faint gray font there. So we see one input for the name, Brian, and an address. Where did this happen? I don't know. I'm trying to think of a San Francisco street name, but I can't. We'll say First Street and 2nd Avenue. Okay, so we've gone and added an input. We also need to be able to update our output to be able to show that result. So we go to our other template here, update, show that result. Whoops. And we will see now we reloaded the page because we made the change, 123 Main Street. So we click continue, we get to the result page, and we're going to see it include the result of our workflow step, the address and name there on the bottom. So that's pretty neat. We were able to create a new module, enhance with existing functionality. What are we doing for time? Let's see, I have time to add one more step that's kind of neat, is we can make use of the the rain catcher camera module to be able to capture a photo. So we want to be able to capture a photo of the collision. So in order to do that, I need to add a button. That's the view page. To be able to do that, I need to add a button that's going to activate the camera module to allow us to take a picture. I got to wire that button up in my controller. So this take photo method is going to be called when we click the button. It's going to check if we're in Cordova, or if we are, it's going to use the mobile camera Angular directive provided by our WFM camera our rain catcher camera module. If it isn't a Cordova application, we're going to use a desktop camera module that we provide through the rain catcher camera module. We're going to use the desktop camera service we provide that uses the webcam on the camera to capture a picture. So that's kind of cool. The only thing we need to do then is we got to go back to our portal application. We got to find another work order and assign it to our collision report. Come back to our mobile application. Begin workflow. And no, I didn't take house and disrepair. Everything worked up until now. Where's the house and disrepair one? Yeah, that other one wasn't assigned to me, to the currently logged in user. Okay, so, no, it's not working. House and disrepair. Oh, it's not going to work. Collision report, house and disrepair. Collision report, update. Did something wrong. And one last check. No, didn't work. You'll have to believe me. It worked. It worked yesterday. There was a nice little button I could push, take my picture, and then we could end the presentation with my mugshot up on the screen. I guess I can't complain too much. The demo gods have been working well with me for DevNation so far. Anyway, that brings me to the end of my presentation. Does anyone have any questions about code reuse, modules, and JavaScript in general, or specifically how we use them in our WFM solution? Or anything, for that matter. Was everyone at the middleware keynote this morning? Did you guys see that demo? That was pretty cool, eh? Right on. All right, well, thank you very much.